The quiet Ohio town of Boardman was rocked by a horrifying crime early on April 4, 1972. In the Boardman Plaza neighborhood of Youngstown, Ohio, the body of a 12-year-old boy named Brad Bellino was discovered thrown in the trash can behind a dairy store. The idea that their community could experience such a tragedy astounded the locals. Since Brad had vanished on the evening of March 31, 1972, it was clear that he had met a terrible end. Who could have done this to an innocent child, and why? This was the one question that was on everyone's mind as the authorities tried to make sense of the situation. Located in Ohio's Mahoning County, Boardman is a thriving community. With a populace exceeding 40,000, it holds the position of the second largest municipality within the Youngstown-Warren metropolitan area. Boardman is a center of business activity, home to a variety of eateries, retail establishments and companies serving the local populace. The township, which dates back to the early 1800s, is home to a number of interesting landmarks, including the Southern Park Mall and Boardman Park. Based on statistical data, the crime rate in Boardman is 2.23 per 1,000 residents over the course of a typical year. It is in this city that our story today took place. Bradley Bellino, son of Joseph and Elisa Bellino, was born on April 7, 1959. He was the fourth kid they had. Brad's parents welcomed him into the world with great joy, and he soon won their hearts. Brad was the youngest member of the family, living alongside his two older brothers and older sister. Don Templeman, Brad's closest friend, recalled him as a young child who was constantly seeking out the next adventure. He was open to trying anything new and had a voracious appetite for information. He was an extrovert. Although we both liked to take risks, it was he who suggested the risk, and I was the one who accepted it, Don Templeman remarked. Don and Brad were best friends for life. They were always open to taking on new challenges and had a constant love of adventure. Although it's unclear when they became best friends, it's likely that Boardman Center Middle School is where they first became acquainted. The two boys were regular bike riders in the town. They occasionally hitched rides as well, Brad being the more daring of the two. There was a rock and gem store not far from Brad's house. The two boys frequented the shop often because they were fascinated by rocks and enjoyed studying them. Their mutual love of baseball bonded them even more. When we started playing baseball together, I was the pitcher, and he was the catcher, and my dad was the coach, Don recalled in an interview. The two boys started spending nights at each other's houses on a regular basis over time. Being only 3 miles apart made it easy for Brad and his friend to hang out whenever they wanted. On Friday evenings, Don would usually go to Brad's house and then walk together to the nearby movie theater. They alternated Saturdays, with the boys staying the night at Applewood Acres at Don's house. They would converse and play games for hours on end, long into the night. I was more naive, and he was more worldly, I think, because of his older brothers. He would educate me on aspects of life I was unaware of, Don remarked. They would go to church with Don's family on Sunday mornings. Don's mom would usually offer Brad a ride home afterward. These weekends held unadulterated joy and camaraderie for Don and Brad. The two friends were fully enjoying life, taking advantage of their youth and all the adventures it had to offer. But then something unexpected happened that would completely alter the situation. Over the Easter break on Friday, March 31, 1972, 11-year-old Don and 12-year-old Brad spent the day together. The two boys went on their customary adventures and wandered the town that Friday. But when they realized a brown van was following them everywhere they went, what had started out as a fun day quickly took a worrying turn. They dismissed it at first as a coincidence, but when they saw the van for the fourth time, their good humor turned to panic. Aware of possible danger, they made the decision to return to Don's home. Returning home also seemed prudent, especially since the sun had begun to set. After arriving at Don's home on Teakwood Drive, Brad grabbed his phone and called his brother to let him know he would be spending the night. But just as Brad was getting comfortable for what should have been a fun evening, the phone rang. The caller was his father, Joseph, who insisted on his going back home right away. Brad had to tell Don he had to leave and return home after receiving this unexpected call. Brad was unable to get a ride home from Don's mother, who was at the grocery store at the time. He was forced to return home alone because Don's father was confined to bed due to the flu. Brad bid his friend farewell and left the house at 7:30 p.m. It never occurred to Don that that would be his last encounter with his closest friend. Reported events following this are not entirely consistent. What is known, though, is that when Brad's father, Joseph, came home late that evening, he had no idea his son had gone missing. It was his assumption that Brad had returned safely from his friend's house and was sound asleep inside. However, Brad's mother, Elisa, was completely oblivious to the events taking place at home that fateful day as she worked in Cleveland. On the Saturday that followed, Joseph slept until noon. But as soon as he got up and started to go about the house, he knew something wasn't right. Brad was not in the house. Concerned, he called the Templeman's house. It didn't take him long to find out that Brad had left their home the previous evening at 7:30 p.m. He ended the call and started looking for Brad around the neighborhood, but he was unable to find him. He reported his son missing to the Boardman Police Department out of desperation. Concern was raised when word of Brad's disappearance quickly spread throughout the small town. Local newspapers joined the search after the news eventually attracted the attention of the media. In the hopes that someone would recognize the missing boy, they published a thorough description of him. According to the description, Brad weighed 80 pounds and was 4'8" inches tall. His short blonde hair fell just below his ears, and his blue eyes were his most striking features. He was wearing blue jeans, a blue ski jacket, and white tennis shoes with black stripes when he vanished. Tony D. Appolito, Brad's first cousin and a Youngstown police officer at the time, joined the search efforts in Boardman after hearing of Brad's disappearance. He was reported missing, and we took to the streets, Tony said. In spite of the community's and the police's best efforts, Brad appeared to have simply disappeared. His absence created a deep hole in the hearts of his friends and family. 4 days after Brad went missing, on April 4, 1972, a body was discovered. A certain sanitation worker by the name of Paul Smith was doing his usual pickup of trash. Something caught his eye as he got closer to a dumpster behind his alley's dairy store. Since the dumpster was only halfway filled, a pair of sneakers protruding at an odd angle caught his attention. When he looked more closely, he was horrified to find a small boy's body hidden under cardboard boxes and abandoned store items. Paul saw that the boy's head was hung down and that a belt was securely fastened around his neck. He had his pants down below his hips, undone. Paul called the police right away to report what he had discovered. Don's house was about 2 miles down the road from this grim discovery. There was a great sense of dread upon the Boardman police officers' arrival at the scene. When they looked inside the dumpster and saw the body inside, it looked like the missing boy they had been looking for non-stop. However, they required verification. They got in touch with Tony, Brad's cousin, who had been helping with the search, and asked him to identify the body. Tony raced to the scene and, despite his sorrow, he was able to identify Brad, his cousin, as the body in the dumpster. After this confirmation, the body was taken out of the dumpster and brought to Youngstown's Southside Hospital for an autopsy. Tony, in the meantime, was given the duty of informing Brad's parents of the tragic news. "It was terrible for my aunt, Elisa, and the whole family," Tony recalled. "You can never move past that. You never think something like this could happen to you or a member of your family, even though you hear about it." He continued. Before the start of the new school week, Don spent the weekend looking for Brad after he vanished. Don had heard his math teacher talking to other teachers in the hallway on the Tuesday that Brad's body was discovered. Don claims that after returning to the classroom, his teacher declared that Brad had been found. Don remembered the whole class cheering and bouncing up and down in joy. His teacher then added the devastating comment, "But he's dead." Don said that the next hour was still a blur in his memory. He did not know if he had fainted, but the next thing he could recall was asking to be sent home at the school office. The autopsy results were released to the public as Brad's bereaved family and friends struggled to process the shock of his untimely death. According to the coroner's report, Brad's body had been violated and he had been strangled to death. Additionally, the report stated that Brad had died at 9 p.m. on Saturday, April 1st, over 24 hours after his last known location. The heartbreak and despair felt by Brad's loved ones were worsened by these upsetting details from the report. Following this, an inquiry was launched to identify the culprit. There was still a lot of unanswered questions. What happened to Brad between Friday at 7:30 p.m. and Saturday at 9 p.m. if the coroner's report was accurate? There was a 26-hour gap that remained unexplained, raising the unsettling possibility that Brad was kept in an unidentified location, or that there was another crime scene in addition to the dumpster. The last time Brad was seen was another question. According to early newspaper reports, he was spotted playing basketball on Saturday afternoon at the Southern Park Mall, the Dairy Queen near North Lima, and the area around Don's house on Matthews Road. Later reports, however, raised doubts about these sightings, speculating that witnesses may have really seen Brad on Friday at those locations. Since it was a holiday and there was no school, it was probably easy for people to mix up the days, which led to this confusion. Don would subsequently claim that it was impossible for Brad to have been seen on Saturday. Don disclosed that he and his father were brought to the station by the police as part of the investigation. There, the detectives showed him Brad's outfit and inquired as to whether it matched what Brad had on when he left Don's house. Don attested to the fact that at that point, they showed Don the belt that had been found around Brad's neck and asked if it belonged to Brad. Don verified that it indeed did. Don found it impossible to shake the image of the brown van they had seen the day Brad vanished. He thought that his best friend's untimely death had something to do with this strange car. "I think whoever was in that van waited until he was in a dark spot and took him," Don said. Police subsequently stated that hundreds of cars, including an orange Corvette, had been reported to them on multiple occasions, with Brad's murder being connected to them. None of these suggestions, though, produced any significant leads. The community came together for Brad's funeral as the investigation into his murder proceeded. Don was one of the guests at the crowd-filled event where standing room was scarce. Almost every student from the school, along with their parents, and even the teachers from the town, came for Brad's funeral. Don's once blissful childhood came to an abrupt end after this tragic event, and his life took on an entirely new and difficult shape. "I was very much more cautious. You believed that everyone was trying to harm you. I became very paranoid," Don remarked. 2 months after Brad's untimely death, in June 1972, Don's parents made the decision to move from Boardman to Tennessee. They were keen to get their family away from a town they felt was unsafe for their kids, and one that had too many painful memories. Don's mother was plagued by guilt for a very long time. She held herself responsible for not being there to drive Brad home the night he vanished. The investigation into Brad's death didn't seem to be moving forward much over time. Months turned into years, and the detectives working on the case kept running into roadblocks despite pursuing numerous leads and interrogating numerous suspects. The case got colder every day, and Brad's chances of winning justice grew smaller. In the year 2001, Jeffrey Patterson, a Boardman former police chief, didn't let Brad's case go unsolved. He made the decision to resume the inquiry into his case. After being dispatched to the cemetery where Brad was buried, detectives meticulously dug up his body in order to collect DNA evidence. Chief Jeffrey took an important action by sending Brad's clothing, which had been kept as evidence, to the state's Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation. A startling discovery was made by forensic scientists during the examination. They discovered a DNA that wasn't Brad's. The investigation gained new hope from this discovery. Two detectives, Jack Nichols and Robert Roop, were given the case as a new assignment in 2007 by Jeffrey, the former chief of police. Nichols was only 14 years old when the terrible event happened back in 1972, and he had grown up in the same neighborhood where Brad went missing. He had been thinking about the case for years, and now he could finally pursue justice in Brad's honor. As soon as the case was given to Nichols and Rupp, they went to work. Their first assignment was to sort through a ton of documents and multiple boxes full of jumbled evidence. Though it was an overwhelming task, they were committed to sorting everything out. As they went through the files, they noticed that 7 people's names kept coming up. These 7 people were designated as persons of interest. Despite the lack of hard evidence linking them to the crime, Nichols and Rupp remained persistent. They got search warrants quickly and got to work. During the search warrants, they collected DNA samples from each of the persons of interest. After that, these samples were sent to the lab for examination in the hopes of matching the DNA found on Brad's clothes. Unfortunately, the negative lab results crushed their hopes. No match was found. The detectives were back to the beginning after this setback. However, they never stopped carefully going through the case files in an effort to find any fresh leads. Sadly, in spite of their unwavering efforts, they were unsuccessful. "We had a lot of guesses and speculations, but no solid information," Nichols stated. Detectives Nichols and Rupp retired in 2017 after years of dedicated work on the case, and a new team took over the investigation. Albert Kakasik, a highly experienced police captain from Boardman, was in charge of this new team. In 2018, in order to help analyze the DNA found on Brad's clothing, Boardman police detectives turned to Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology company. As technology advanced, it opened up new possibilities for solving cases like Brad's. According to the criminal profile Parabon gave the Boardman police, they were probably looking for a man of European descent with fair or very fair skin, freckles, brown or hazel eyes, and black or brown hair. The list of possible suspects was then reduced by Parabon using familial DNA to identify a group of people who had similar family histories or physical traits. Detectives collected DNA samples from individuals identified by Parabon as potentially having familial ties to the unidentified suspect over the course of the next 4 years. They worked non-stop. They were able to narrow down their search to certain branches of the extended family tree and rule out others thanks to the results of those DNA tests. In the end, with the help of a DNA test, they narrowed in on a man known as Joseph Norman Hill. Investigators searched far and wide for Hill's relatives in order to collect DNA samples for analysis. In the end, the findings showed a 98.2% chance that the DNA on Brad's clothes belonged to Hill. At last, the investigators had solved the case and found the guilty party. But there was a major setback. The man identified by DNA testing, Joseph Norman Hill, was no longer alive. He was 79 years old when he lost his fight with cancer in 2019, and to make matters more difficult, his body had been cremated. Detectives were unable to confirm his involvement with additional tests on his remains due to this regrettable turn of events. There was little easily accessible information about Joseph Norman Hill's life when the investigators dug into his life. Their investigation was limited by the fact that his wife had died in 1993 and he had few family ties. But their investigation found that Hill, who lived on Shady Side Drive in Boardman, was 32 years old at the time of Brad's murder. He moved to California in 1978 for work-related reasons while working as a truck driver for a company that sold bottled water. There was no known connection between Brad's family and Hill. Hill's sole run-in with the law dates back to his conviction in 1986 for soliciting inappropriate behavior and disorderly conduct in Los Angeles. It took a total of slightly more than $29,000 to solve Brad's case after years of searching for DNA evidence. Nevertheless, the boy's family was able to find closure, so it was worth the expense. Authorities eventually came to the conclusion that they would have felt very confident in front of a grand jury in the event that Hill had been alive, and this would have led to an indictment. According to Boardman Police Chief Todd Worth, who made this announcement during a press conference on January 24, 2023, Brad's family had decided not to issue any public statements. In order to process the new information and carry on with their healing process, they asked for privacy. They were going through a difficult time, and the last thing they needed was media attention. However, the tale is not over yet. Hill was shockingly connected in June 2023 to the 1975 death of another young boy. A mile or so from the Bellino home, 13-year-old David Evans, a Boardman resident as well, vanished 3 years after Brad was kidnapped and killed. Evans' father notified the police that he had been absent for the majority of the evening, and at midnight on January 18, 1975, Evans was listed as missing. Evans, who had been absent for over 6 hours, had diabetes. Sadly, 4 days later, he was found dead and frozen on his back in the backyard of a house on Crestline Place in Boardman. According to the autopsy, Evans had a puncture wound on his lower back and fractures to his left forearm bones. These wounds had been caused following his passing. The report also mentioned several abrasions on his upper back and face. A profile found on Evans's underwear matched Hill's DNA after multiple DNA tests were done on his clothing, which were preserved by the police, proving his connection to this second murder. The fact that Brad's murder and Evans' murder have been solved after more than 50 years demonstrates the commitment and tenacity of law enforcement personnel, as well as the remarkable developments in DNA technology. Even though the offender will never face justice in a court of law, the community and the families of the victims benefit greatly from knowing who he is. In 2018, Sarah Ashley Hill, a mother of 2 who was 33 years old, was employed as a waiter at a neighborhood diner in Patrick County, Virginia. She was well known for her kind disposition, upbeat smile, and passion for dancing and music. She was very close to her sister, April, who frequently assisted her with her kids. Out of her 5 siblings, Sarah was the only one with the attractive red hair and vivid blue eyes. She used to get teased and told she was adopted by her siblings. Sarah was visiting her friends in North Carolina in June of 2018. She called April on her cell phone at 1:30 a.m. on June 6, informing her that she was on Blue Hollow Road, close to Mount Airy, and that she would need a ride. Sarah did not give an explanation for her early morning walk. April was unable to simply leave her job, which was nearly an hour away. At Elkins Hugh Chatham Memorial Hospital, April worked as a registered nurse. Sarah Hill had vanished from view by the time the family got to Mount Airy. They assumed she had found another ride, or perhaps she had managed to get into her own vehicle, a white 2000 Ford Taurus. When April texted Sarah the following day to check on her and to ask if she still needed a ride, April received no response. When April called back, it went to voicemail. Sarah's phone had been switched off for 2 weeks. It was highly unusual for Sarah to be disconnected from everyone for so long. April claims that they spoke at least once a week, if not more frequently. April mentioned that Sarah had a lot of dubious friends and was dependent on illegal substances. April pondered whether it had anything to do with her sister going missing. Sarah was officially declared missing 1 month after her last sighting. Investigators began looking into her disappearance right away. Her white Ford Taurus was soon sighted at a shop close to the intersection of Blue Hollow Road and North Carolina 89. It was captured on camera footage that the store owner obtained while attempting to apprehend shoplifters. Sarah was, however, not named among the people suspected of misconduct there. Upon searching the vehicle, the police discovered Sarah's handbag, phone keys, and a few personal belongings inside. Nevertheless, no DNA fingerprints or other identifying marks that may have connected someone to her disappearance were discovered. The police thought of every scenario in which Sarah might have vanished. They looked into any enemies or issues she might have had with anyone who could have hurt her. They looked to see if she was burdened with debt or other financial issues that might have caused her to elope. Investigators also investigated whether she had a history of substance abuse or mental illness, which could have influenced her behavior or judgment. They looked into any romantic relationships or domestic conflicts she may have had that could have resulted in aggression or jealousy. They did not, however, discover any proof to back up any of these theories. 3 separate properties on King Park Circle in Mount Airy, North Carolina, were among the many locations the Surry County Sheriff Office checked during the investigation that began in January 2019. After following Sarah's last known movements, detectives surmised that she was in the neighboring Stokes County, where she had been hanging out with a man. This person of interest displayed suspicious behavior, including restricting entry into his residence. It was found that the man had faced assault charges in the past. The Asbury Road property in Stokes County, North Carolina, where Sarah was last seen at the time of her disappearance, was shown to detectives in 2022. The Surry County Sheriff's Office, the Stokes County Sheriff's Office, and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation carried out the execution of a search warrant for the property located at 1791 Asbury Road, Westfield, North Carolina, on Monday, October 17, 2022. Investigators brought in specialist personnel to use heavy machinery to stabilize an existing structure and move dirt and terrain. Beneath the floorboards were human remains. Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center received the remains. After an autopsy on October 20, 2022, it was determined that Sarah Ashley Hill's remains were what was found. The Stokes County Sheriff's Office announced on October 11, 2023, that Leroy Hoover had been detained and charged with killing Sarah. Hoover is presently awaiting trial while being held without bond in the Stokes County Jail. In Stokes County, he is also involved in other cases. We can only imagine how difficult this has been for the family of Miss Hill, Sheriff Joey Lemons remarked. The detectives working on this case from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, the Patrick County Sheriff's Office, the Surry County Sheriff's Office, and the Stokes County Sheriff's Office did an amazing job and never gave up. While nothing can truly bring a loved one back, we can only hope that this gives Miss Hill's family some sense of closure.